This is a copy of the sermon that we preached at North Shields Evangelical Church on Sunday the 18th of August. It's based on 2 Kings chapter 5, which I'll be reading throughout this. I'm going to look at 4 things. I'm going to look at the little voice that can't be silenced, the little word that can't be spoken, the little faith that can't be disappointed, and the little girl that wasn't heard. So firstly, the little voice that can't be silenced. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master, and in high favour, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valour, but he was a leper. After reading one line in Naaman's CV, you can tell that he was a big man. In verse 1, the author lays on one description after another that builds a picture of Naaman being someone very, very great. Naaman was in the army. Naaman was in the army. But that's not all we learn about Naaman. Naaman was not just in the army, he was a commander in the army. And he wasn't just great in the eyes of other military personnel. Naaman had risen to becoming great in the eyes of the king. And Naaman was not just one of the king's top 100 people. Naaman was so highly regarded, he was in the top 3. Naaman hadn't just fought in battles. He'd fought and won. And he'd done so defying the odds. Naaman's CV indicates that he was a great man, but Naaman was a leper. And no matter how hard he tried to change his identity by fighting and winning, by being in the army, by being a commander, by becoming great in the eyes of king, no matter how hard he tried to change his identity, he couldn't change who he was by nature, a leper. And so Naaman was a bit like Will Smith, who, despite all his Hollywood success, will never be able to shake off the shame of that Oscar night slap. Naaman was like Gareth Southgate, who, regardless of his success as a manager, he'll never be able to forget. He'll forever carry around the regret of that missed penalty. Naaman was like Lance Armstrong, who will never be able to separate his name from the word cheat. Naaman was like us, who carry around with us the blotches of regret, shame, and guilt. Shame, regret, the guilt of sin. No matter how much we try and forget, no matter how much we try and cover them up, no matter how much we tried and rewrite our CV as somebody good, the regret, shame, and guilt of certain sins are often carried around by us our whole life. The little voice cannot be silenced. In addition, just like Naaman was a leper by nature, we are sinners by nature as well. We can try and prove ourselves to be good people as much as we like, but then the whole charade comes collapsing down when we reveal our true self in a spurt of anger or in a moment of lust. I don't expect you to like that description of you. You might even deny it. Sinner by nature? Surely not. But before you switch off, imagine you're sat on the sofa one night and the phone rings. Boop, 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 boop. Hello, my name's Judith from the RSPCC, the Royal Society promoting the consumption of chocolate. I've been employed by the RSPCC to encourage you to eat that chocolate bar that's been on your cupboard for the last 6 months. Now, I know that if you were left to your own devices, that chocolate bar would stay there till it was out of date. But on behalf of the RSPCC's countless supporters, please resist your natural urge to leave that bar uneaten and force yourself to consume the whole 500 grams in one go. Now, that's silly, because you don't need multinational organisations to phone you up to encourage you to eat chocolate. Why? Because that desire comes naturally to us. They don't need to hire people to persuade us. However, multinational organisations do have to do lots of things to get people to give £1 a month to feed some starving human being, such as hiring people to phone you up. Natural desires need no encouragement. Less natural ones take a lot. To get me to show a little kindness takes a lot of persuasion, a lot of prodding and poking, whereas no one needs to encourage me to be selfish. Now, please don't read too much into what I've said about charities. I'm not suggesting that you're being selfish if you don't respond to every or even any appeal. I'm simply trying to get us to think about how some desires need effort and encouragement to prize them out, whereas some take none. You have to work at contentment, whereas envy comes naturally. I have to tell myself to be more kind, but I don't need reminders to be selfish. I have to count to at least 10 to force myself to respond calmly. I can go from 0 to 60 on the anger scale in 1 second flat. After one small good thing, I can become proud. But it takes 1 million mistakes before I feel forced to be that bit more humble. Naaman had to put effort to become an army commander. Naaman had to work at being valiant and brave. In contrast, he was naturally a leper, and no amount of effort could hide or change who he truly was. Likewise, we have to put effort into being kind, effort into being patient, effort into being generous, effort into being humble. Whereas anger, pride, selfishness and envy come naturally to us. And the scary thing is, our nature as sinners is something no man has ever been able to change. For a short time we might try hard, even succeed at building a reputation that we can be proud of. But then in a moment of anger or lust or envy or hate, we're reminded of our true nature once again. And sometimes facing up to who you are can be an unpleasant thing. So that's the little voice that can't be silenced. Now I'm going to look at the little word that can't be spoken. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master, and in high favour, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valour, but he was a leper. Now the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his lord, "Thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel." And the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you Naaman my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy." And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Only consider and see how he is seeking a quarrel with me." But when Elijah the man of God heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king, saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come now to me, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots, and stood at the door of Elijah's house. And Elijah sent a message to him, saying, Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be clean. But Naaman was angry, and went away, saying, Behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me, and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand over this place, and cure the leper. Because of his job as an army commander, Naaman was used to having to say difficult things. I'm sorry, Jimmy. The field doctor thinks the stab wound has penetrated your subclavian artery. Mrs. Jones, I'm here to tell you, Jimmy won't be coming home. Naaman would have been used to saying difficult words. But did you notice the 4 words Naaman found impossible to say? I'm Naaman, Verse 11. Naaman was angry and went away, saying, Behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me, and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand over the place, and cure the leper. Naaman wanted to keep as much distance between him and his leprosy as possible. Perhaps that's why he accumulated all those letters after his name. Naaman, victorious, commander, man of valour, his majesty's best. Naaman wanted to keep distance between his name and his disease. Yes, he was a leper. But he was not like your average leper. He was a man of rank. And so when Naaman came to see Elisha, he wanted to be thought of in a different way. As I was thinking about this, it struck me how much I do the same. I want to keep as much distance between me and my sin as possible. If someone accuses me of something, I'll jump on the defensive. Only with difficulty will I say, I have sinned. But of course, as a Christian leader, I have to admit some degree of sinfulness, a token reference every now and then. But when the words, I'm a sinner, when those words come out my mouth, I'll make sure I point out where I rank on the scale. Naaman was keen to stress his military rank. I'm keen to stress my rank when it comes to levels of sin. I may lust, but I'm not like those who watch porn every night. I may judge people, but I'm not as harsh as Jeremy Clarkson. Sure, like every human, I can be a little unkind, but I'm not a monster like Hitler or Stalin. I don't know if you've never noticed this about yourself. If we do admit to some degree of sinfulness, we're always clear to highlight our rank. We always refer to those who rank below us, those who are a lot worse than us. But have you ever noticed that we never refer to those who are above us? I've never once heard a chocoholic say, Yes, I'll admit it, I'm a chocoholic. But I'm not like those chocoholics who snack on a whole chocolate bar every evening. No, by 6 a.m. I'm tucking into a bowl of Cocoa Pops covered in 3 bars of melted Cadbury's. And by 11 a.m. I've taken the first bite out of my lunchtime snack. So please, whatever you do, don't put me in the same categories as those who simply nibble on a bar every night. There's alligators who take smaller bites than I do. Yes, I'll admit it, I'm a chocoholic. But don't put me in the same box as those one-a-bar nightaholics. Put me in the same box as Homer Simpson and Augustus Gloop. This type of confession never happens. Why? Because when we rank ourselves, we only ever make reference to those who are a lot worse than us, and never make reference to those who are better. Like with Naaman, who liked to stress his rank. Those 4 little words, I am a sinner, are as difficult to say for us. That takes us from the little words that can't be spoken, to the little faith that can't be disappointed. But Naaman was angry and went away, saying, Behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me, and stand and call upon the name of his Lord his God, and wave his hand over the place, and cure the leper. Are not Abner and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them, and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. But his servants came near and said to him, My father, it is a great word the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, Wash and be clean? So he went and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. I've perhaps been a little hard on Naaman. I've never experienced the stigma of disease or disability. Only somebody like Naaman would know how difficult it was to do what the prophet said. Naaman had set off with 10 changes of clothes to offer to the man who could cure him of his leprosy. These 10 sets were taken from the Syrian's Giorgio Armani silk range. On his journey to Elisha, he'd stood in front of the king of Israel, stood in his royal robes. And Naaman had Israel's king tear his clothes off in public. And the king, with his well-oiled skin and 6-pack chest, this king had nothing to be ashamed of. But now leper Naaman is being asked to wash in the Jordan River. Naaman is being asked to remove the clothes that covered his sores, walk naked into the Jordan River in full view of everyone nearby. Naaman was being asked to get out of the water, and instead of covering his mangled skin in a towel, he's got to go back in the Jordan another 6 times. Naaman the leper is basically being asked to walk naked down the Paris Fashion Week catwalk 7 times with all eyes on his naked sores. No wonder Naaman, instead of stripping himself for a full bath, no wonder Naaman simply dipped in his toes. So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. And his flesh was restored, and like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. God is the ultimate customer care officer. In my customer care course, I was taught never promise people Marks and Spencers, because when you give them Poundland, they'll end up disappointed. Instead, promise them Poundland, and then when they get Marks and Spencers, they'll be blown away. God, through Elisha, promised Naaman cleansing. He promised to remove Naaman's leprous skin. But Naaman's little faith was rewarded with the skin of Taylor Swift, or whatever your cultural version of the best skin is. We read that he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored, like the flesh of a little child. God is the ultimate in customer care, more generous, more gracious, more compassionate than any of us deserve or expect. You know, Naaman, as a leper, had the type of skin you wouldn't touch with a barge pole. But God didn't just give him the skin of a 40-year-old army veteran, the type of skin you'd maybe touch with a small stick. God gave Naaman the type of skin new mums and dads want to blow raspberries on and embrace in a hug. For his flesh was restored, like the flesh of a little child. The little faith that Naaman displayed was not met with disappointment. God did more than he could ask or imagine. And good news, God is willing to do even more for me and for you. When we come to God, walking that catwalk with all our sin on display, we can know that if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just, and will forgive us our sins, and purify us from all unrighteousness. But God hasn't just found a way to forgive us and make us barely acceptable. No, God's Son Jesus not only removed our identity as sinners in God's sight, Jesus also gave us his perfect righteousness in its place. As we read in the book of Corinthians, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. God doesn't just make those who put their faith in Jesus barely acceptable, tolerable in his sight. God now sees us like he sees his own Son Jesus, the child he loves and willingly embraces with open arms. See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. So where do we go from here? Well, if you're a Christian listening to this, I hope that chapter 5 has given you a fresh appreciation of God's generosity. Despite our unwillingness to admit that we're sinners, when we do so, God gives us a new, wonderful identity in exchange. If you've not yet responded to this offer before, don't put off doing so. Listen to that little voice that reminds us that we're maybe not as right with God as we should be. Speak those 3 difficult words, I have sinned, and place a little faith in God's Son, Jesus Christ. Trust that he did everything to make all who trust in him right with God. Not simply right, I suppose I'll accept them, but loved right to the max. Now, if this is all stuff you've heard before, you now might be saying to yourself, time to switch off. I've heard last week's sermon about Jesus again, just with new words. I know about God's grace and generosity already. If that is you, please spend another few minutes learning about the little voice of that little girl. In verses 1 to 3. Naaman was a leper. Now the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. Everyone had heard the name of Naaman. He had loud trumpets announce his return from battle. His name was written in the Syrian history books. Numerous major battles had Naaman's name attached. But this little raid, this low-key raid on a little Israelite village, this little raid would not have gone down in the Syrian history books. The men who carried it out probably weren't valiant warriors. They were more like teenagers probably who liked to play war. And their prize of war wasn't the Victoria Cross, but a little girl. This little raid and this little girl's name would not be making any history books. And if I'm honest, neither will any of your names who are listening to this today. Neither will mine. But there's one thing that we can do, which will make our insignificant lives of eternal significance. Now the Syrians in one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy." This little girl had seen Elisha cure people of leprosy enough times for her little mind to remember. But she didn't simply store that little bit of information in her mind. She had the guts to open her mouth and tell someone about it. In the land of Syria, the home of the Syrian gods, she talked about the God of Israel. Why? Well, she couldn't just sit there knowing all about Naaman's condition, knowing all that what God could do. She couldn't just sit there and stay quiet. Instead, in the land of Syria, the home of the Syrian gods, she talked about the God of Israel, eager for this message to reach Naaman's ears. Yes, her name would never make it into any history books. But the Bible devotes these verses to her legacy, to remind us of how significant her actions were. She'd heard about Elisha before. Today you've heard about Jesus again. How might your actions mirror this little girl? Rather than giving the general application, outreach, witness, evangelism, I'm going to give 4 very specific suggestions, which some of them are specific to the church I'm part of, North Seals Evangelical Church, and some of them you might be able to generalise to your own situation. Feel free to take or leave or reshape these suggestions to suit your situation. So let's make the completely uninformed guess that this little girl was 4 years old. Why not commit to investing in a new friendship over the next 4 years? Now, you don't make friends simply to tell people about Jesus, but you have to know non-Christian friends to be able to tell non-Christian friends about Jesus. So why not commit to a new, regular friendship? We're already, as a church at North Shields, we're already maybe 1 year into our new project with Christ Church Newcastle. In the next 3 years, there'll probably be changes suggested that would better enable the church to engage with non-believers. Over the next 3 years, why not support any change in church life that will increase the chances of non-believers hearing about Christ, even if these changes may not be to your personal first choice? How about a 2-year project, going through the Word one-to-one with a friend? Ask a friend if they'd like to meet up for a low-key walk through the life of Jesus. If they say yes, meet up every month for the next 2 years to go through this little book. Don't need any particular Bible knowledge. You can read the book of John and it tells you what it's about on the opposite side of the page. It's a very low-key, informal way of introducing someone to the truth about Jesus Christ. Or how about, over the next year, praying for someone regularly who does not yet know Jesus? Pray for them to come to faith over the next year. Yes, you and I may know all about Jesus. Let's pray that someone would soon hear about him for the first time.